Scott Fraser, thank you so much for making time today for this interview. It's really nice to see you. And you've been in the GI space for 25 years now,
Yeah.
and that to a variety of roles, touching both on the business and technology side. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Praveen, for having me, and I've really enjoyed the panelists that you've had to date, and this is really a great forum in this virtual world as you're getting different perspectives from thought-leading groups and bankers and stakeholders on how they're weathering this crisis and coming out of it. And really, it's sharing best practices because we're all in this together. So really thank you for that. A little bit about myself. I've been very GI endoscopy centric pretty much my entire career for now about 25 years. And first started off in medtech with microvasive, which was the endoscopy division of Boston Scientific, both in sales, product management, and market development. And then had really a unique opportunity for my first startup, being one of the first U.S. employees at Given Imaging, where I led marketing efforts during the launch of capsule endoscopy, and that was such an amazing time frame. And then from there was one of the founding executives of EndoChoice, which is now part of Boston Scientific. And again, we launched during a downturn in the economy. We founded the company late 2007, and then 2008 hit when we were trying to raise money. After that was a consultant with a private equity-backed ASC company, and then president of Physicians Endoscopy, to form the new division of Physicians Endoscopy, which is the partnership with Capital Digestive Care. That was an incredible experience to be on the operator side of both an ASC company as well as a practice management company. And I have had, since that time, I've had the opportunity to work with both leading private equity firms as well as Fortune 500 medtech and also startup medtech companies, really advising them on the evolution of what's happening, not just in gastroenterology, but other subspecialty medicine where private equity is investing in MSOs. And it's been a real honor to have these companies seek me out. And I formally founded Fraser Healthcare, which is my consulting group that advises both private equity and medtech clients. Mm-hmm. And I think even more important than my business experience is my dad is a colon cancer survivor. He almost died from colon cancer, and that has instilled in me the importance of screening.
So I wanted to start by asking you about the two questions that you told me the other day that most GI practices are thinking about right now. The first one being, how do we recover? And the second being, after we recover, how do we evolve and how do we start thinking differently? I'd love to get your perspective on both these questions.
Yeah, I think as I look at how to recover and, some of the best practices that have been shared by some of your previous guests and just in discussions that I've, had with many physicians, it's looking at your different lines of business, and whether it's your ambulatory surgery center, as well as your practice, if you have infusion, if you have clinical research, and understanding what a pathway to recovery looks like. The thing that I think a lot of smaller groups don't fully appreciate is their EMRs are a wealth of not only patient information, but identifying future patients. And as I talk to different groups and also talk to some of the EMR gurus that are in this space, is very few groups really do a good job querying or mining that data, meaning that you have patient populations that have IBS. You have patient populations that are at risk of NASH, and identifying those patients or the at-risk hereditary patients, and proactively reaching out to them. And it's not your answering service or your call service contacting these patients. I would really encourage caregivers, nurses, as well as physicians to pick up the phone and proactively call these patients and share with them you know, educate them that they potentially are at risk and they need to come in for an interval or a screening. Because of particularly the areas that I mentioned, there is some easy to adopt ancillary lines of revenue that groups are doing right now. And, you know, if I mentioned the IBS patient population, if I look at IBS, these patients are very, very difficult and I know frustrating for gastroenterologists to manage because medical treatment is not terribly successful. But there is successful dietary management with the FODMAP diet. And there are ancillary streams through third parties like Modify Health that allow you to offload your IBS patients to their team of dietitians, and they administer the FODMAP diet through a set meal plan. The whole time you are getting, the patient is putting their symptom scores into an iPhone app, and you as a provider have that integrated back into your EMR so you can better manage that patient population. And they're seeing great success, the groups that are doing that type program now. You know, moving over to the hepatology space, I think this is literally and figuratively a massive patient population that walks through the clinic doors and the ASC doors every day. And very little is done to identify them or do appropriate workups. And now with the recent technology of the FibroScan, which is easily implemented in the office and can be done by a medical assistant, maybe takes 5 minutes. Although not a huge ancillary stream, it helps you identify at-risk patients and then manage them accordingly. And then on top of that, if you have a clinical research entity to enroll patients in the new NASH studies, which, you know, there's billions of dollars right now in development of NASH drugs that are all waiting the FDA clearance. And clinical research has really burned a lot of smaller groups previously, particularly with IBD. And, you know, they had a difficult time with it. It was a big investment. There are companies out there like Objective GI, which works on a joint venture model to help make this really a frictionless process. They take care of bringing the protocols, training the staff, running budgets, recruiting staff, and all you do as a small to mid-sized practice is refer your patients over to this joint venture clinical research entity. And it's the profit margin on this ancillary is very substantial, upwards of $500,000 after you have it up and running. So, and it offers a clinical benefit to your patient. So, shifting gears to the ambulatory center, so much of GI is dependent on screening colonoscopy. 60 to 70% of any ambulatory center's revenue is from the screening business, and then the downstream revenue from pathology and anesthesia also is very substantial. But it's now that our endo centers have slowed because of COVID protocols, we might be at half capacity, and in some cases, centers that are just opening here in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast are maybe at a third capacity. It's thinking, what can we do for at-risk patients? Maybe with advanced imaging. Advanced imaging has been around for almost 2 decades. And, if I'm thinking about EUS or confocal microscopy or the Cellvizio technology, with confocal microscopy, there's established reimbursement for that procedure that CMS has Category 1 code. And, it's an adjunct to EGD with biopsy. And again, it adds about $600 to $650 per case to the facility fee. And, it's meaningful if you are doing it appropriately with at-risk patients, which everyone is seeing with these high-grade dysplasia patients. So there's a lot of things that I think gastroenterologists are trained in during your fellowship that a lot of my good friends that, are also gastroenterologists have somewhat neglected. Because of the fact that there historically has been such volume and such a need for screening colonoscopy and a tremendous revenue stream. And I think it's going back to our training, meaning, gastroenterology training, to understand what are we trained in, what clinical service can we provide to our patients that is warranted. And I think that's an important point. and what are we going to be paid for? And the examples of what I just gave all have very favorable ancillary revenue streams that I would encourage groups to evaluate.
Mm-hmm. If we take diet and nutrition as an ancillary, I think everybody knows that it's an important ancillary. Everybody does it, but the margins are so thin on that, so there's no clear payment model. So how do you figure that out?
No, it's a great question. And I know a lot of groups historically, even large groups, have maybe hired a dietitian, and the ROI with that staff member just wasn't favorable. And one of the things that the company that I mentioned, Modify Health, has done is they've developed a model where it's their dietitians. You're referring a patient to Modify Health, and for that referral, the patient then is buying the FODMAP diet, which is an 8-week program. Not that it's a huge ancillary stream. It's about $100 to $150 per patient that's enrolled. But what it allows you to do is you're not investing in a dietitian. You're not spending the time to try to educate a patient on the FODMAP diet, which is complicated. I think even for the most skilled gastroenterologist and a very educated patient, it's hard to understand, what to do and what not to do on each week of this diet. And it's being managed with a very smart symptom score app. So essentially, it's taking a very difficult patient population that a lot of gastroenterologists are frustrated with managing. And the figures about IBS patients, moving from gastroenterologist to gastroenterologist, on average, they see 5 gastroenterologists before they actually feel like they've had some treatment, because they're such a frustrating patient population to manage. This program is a way to keep these patients, make these patients, their symptoms go away, and not eat up valuable resources in your practice or make big investments, while still recouping some ancillary stream from them. And although not substantial, it's a way to keep that patient engaged in your practice.
Mm-hmm. And how about the clinical trials with objective GI that you mentioned? When you say $500,000, is it per trial? Like, how does that even work?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and you brought up the question before about established reimbursement. Large groups do clinical trials very, very well. If I look at around the country, whether it's GastroHealth, TDDC, or Capital Digestive Care, or Minji, they all have very large clinical trial organizations, and upwards of 20 different protocols at any one given time. It was a big investment, and it was a slow ramp. And the nice thing about clinical trials is they're not dependent on reimbursement. You are getting paid directly from the sponsor. And particularly with the latest NASH trials, the enrollment fees are very high because it's such a race right now to get these drugs to market. From about 30 different pharma companies have drugs in some phase of development right now related to NASH. So what the team at Objective GI does is they come in under a joint venture model. It's a small startup fee from the mid-sized practice, and really it becomes an integrated part of your practice that they are managing for you, meaning that they are not only bringing the protocols to you, which is often difficult for groups to get to meet the different clinical trial sponsors, but they have set protocols. They're a very experienced team of clinical research organization executives, and they are providing the training, the staffing, the budgetary process needed to run successful clinical trials. And you as a provider, based on, again, a set criteria, are working up patients. In this case, you're working up patients with FibroScan, which is paid for by the different sponsors. You may work up 30 patients with the FibroScan and only identify 2 that you're enrolling in a trial. But that FibroScan, which is in your clinic, it's being reimbursed for by the clinical trial sponsor. So it's a great way. The numbers on fatty liver disease are anywhere from 80 million to 100 million Americans of which about 25 million will develop NASH. Again, this is literally and figuratively a massive, massive patient population that our gastroenterologists see every day, and very few groups are doing a lot for these patients. So I'm really excited about that particular ancillary because, again, it falls in line with GI, and so much of fatty liver disease is dietary management too. So we can help these patients, based on your nutrition training as well, by just losing, 10, 20 pounds.
Let's switch gears to private equity, since you've been involved with private equity for a while. I want to know what the PE funds are thinking.
We are still very, very much in the early stages of the consolidation of this subspecialty of gastroenterology. If I look at other subspecialties where private equity has been very, very active in dermatology or in ophthalmology, particularly in dermatology, you have over 30 platforms. And by the latest estimates I've seen, you have about 50% of the private practice dermatologists are now part of an MSO. Where, right now, 8 platforms within GI and close to 1,000 gastroenterologists. I know there's a lot of deals that are in the pipeline that are in, that should be closing by the end of the year. We still have a really small percentage of the overall, 13,000 to 14,000 gastroenterologists in the US that are part of an MSO. In terms of deal structure, the thing that's changing right now in this level setting is sellers, meaning the groups, are being asked to take on more risk. And this can be done in a number of different ways. The structure typically is in the seller's note, and what the buyers, private equity firms, as well as their lenders, are asking them to do is structure deals, that allow groups to get an additional payout for that transactional value when they hit their historical levels of 2019. So really, the onus or the burden is on that group. If I'm a group of 20 gastroenterologists and my volume was hit down to 30%, I'm betting on the fact, I'm really betting on myself and my partners that we're going to get back to that 100% level that we were at in 2019 to achieve, the full transactional value. Additionally, the structure of these deals are less cash. So no longer is it, this massive cash payout. Sellers are being asked and taking more equity, again, betting in yourself. And, I've always, stressed to gastroenterologists that are good friends is, many doctors have invested in real estate or in restaurants or, more risky type investments. Investing in themselves is by far the best investment they can ever make. And I think, looking at your own ambulatory center is a great example. Ambulatory centers were an investment that you made in yourself and your group. And I would argue are absolutely one of the most valuable assets probably in your entire portfolio today.
Scott, if you were to put yourself in the shoes of an average GI practice anywhere in the country, how would you go about making a decision today? The GI practice out there has several choices right now, right? Like, they can continue to be independent doing what they're doing now, or they can consolidate with other groups in the local area independently, or they can seek out private equity and go that route. How do you go about making a decision if you were in their shoes?
It's a great question. I think the first thing I would do with my partners is really do a deep assessment of the local market conditions. And so much of healthcare, as we all know, is local. So not only what the payer market looks like, what our referral market looks like, but I think more importantly, what's happening in our broader healthcare market. Meaning, I'm going to reference the DC area as a great example. Where I did a transaction with Capital Digestive previously. The DC market has a common threat that really has caused a lot of consolidation across all subspecialties. And that was a combination of Hopkins moving south and buying up not only hospitals, but primary care in the DC metro area, as well as MedStar, which again is another major hospital group doing the same. That put a real threat across all the subspecialists in the area, and you've seen massive consolidation in that marketplace. Not just with gastroenterology and capital digestive, but if I look at urology, dermatology, ophthalmology, primary care, you have one of the largest primary care groups with Privia Health in that market. And most recently, a transaction during this pandemic was with Shady Grove Fertility, which is a multi-state platform, not just in fertility, but also women's health. They have all consolidated because of the common threat in their local market, and also because they have a major payer that has about 30% of that market. So they needed size and scale and sophistication to be able to negotiate contracts. That would be the first step I would do. The second step, I think, is very similar to the analogy of if you are thinking about selling a house. It's getting your house in order, meaning, if I have an outdated bathroom or I need a new roof, it's making investments that will make my practice more attractive to not only a potential strategic, meaning an established MSO platform, or a potential suitor with a PE platform, if that's the avenue I want to head. And I think it's investment in an EMR, some data analytics, revenue cycle management, as you well know, is often an area that groups don't really have sophisticated revenue cycle management or a process and system to track that. And oftentimes are leaving, not only hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars a day on the table because of errors that they're making in coding or just not following and processing claims. There's very low-hanging fruit. So it's focused on, if I want to be acquired, making the time and the investment up front to make my practice more attractive. And then if you're truly thinking about looking and staying independent during this consolidation, I think it's looking at what can we do and what can we offer addition to our patients. We talked about screening colonoscopy business being, a threat. It's really diversifying your group into some of the areas that I talked about before. One area I didn't mention, which is an area that's been around for years and again has established reimbursement, is hemorrhoidal treatment. It's looking at sometimes, the small incremental things that you can add to your practice that are going to make you more stable, as we weather through this storm. Now is the time to scrutinize and review every one of your contracts. It can be from your leases on your office or your ambulatory center with your landlords, looking to defer payments as you are trying to recover.
How could GI groups collaborate with industry?
Industry, whether it's the big pharma companies or med tech companies and supply companies, have local marketing campaigns and budgets. And more importantly, promote practices that are utilizing their products, or maybe recruit patients via social media in a certain disease segment. So, as opposed to industry coming to you and trying to sell you on a new product and then offering up a potential marketing program, I would reach out to your industry partners and inquire about this, because it does exist and they have resources. There are some great courses and forums every year. One being the GI Roundtable that Gene Overholt started and Klaus Mergener has now taken to the next level. This meeting, which has been around for years, is really where the leaders in private practice GI talk about different business strategies and new ancillaries. And it's a great forum. I would also encourage private groups to become members of DHPA. Which is the Digestive Health Physicians Association, an advocacy group that now has close to 3,000 members across the country. And the sharing of best practices with DHPA leadership has been phenomenal. And I would argue DHPA has been part of the wave of PE sponsors, meaning they're sharing best practices, transactional advice, on how to maneuver through a transaction, what to prepare for, what to do with each other. And again, it's a very collaborative effort. So in a nutshell, understand your data, understand your local market, understand where there may be threats.
When you push this ball 5 years from now or longer into the horizon, what do you see happen? What is the holy grail for GI?
It's a great question, and I think that the market forces right now that you mentioned, and one of the biggest market forces are payers. If I look at the larger ecosystem within gastroenterology, at the top of the food chain are payers. Payers have consolidated massively, and now are looking at buying providers. So they're not only consolidating, across different markets, they're consolidating service lines. If I then go down a step, we talked about hospital consolidation. That has happened. Then down a step is you look at industry. Industry has consolidated. My two previous startup examples, both with Given Imaging, which is now part of Medtronic, and EndoChoice, which is now part of Boston Scientific, are great examples of what's happened with industry consolidation. And pharma consolidation has been massive as well. The reason why the consolidation has happened all around us has so much to do with economies of scale and resources. Is, speaking from my executive experience at EndoChoice, we didn't have the resources and the field team that a Boston Scientific has. They've taken our company, which was approaching $80 million in revenue, and those product lines have grown them substantially in the last 3 years because of their commercial infrastructure that we just couldn't invest in. So scale matters. And if I look forward in terms of, unfortunately, at the bottom of the food chain of this consolidation are the gastroenterologists or the subspecialists. They haven't consolidated. But I look at groups that have consolidated and have integrated as well. And I think that's a key point. I know you had Jim Levitt on previously from Gastro Health. They've been at this now over 4 years with Audax. And you've seen the evolution with what Gastro Health has done is they are a fully integrated platform right now and have tremendous efficiencies that are all centralized versus some other platforms that are just starting that still have yet to do that integration and create those efficiencies. So I think in the future, the more integrated a platform can be and a GI group can be, lowering their administrative burdens, but also allowing them to maximize different ancillary lines, maximize, at-risk type contracts. If we look at, whether it's a colonoscopy bundle or managing a certain disease patient population like IBD, these are the initiatives that integrated groups are pursuing that really will limit and exclude private groups because of the resources needed and the scale needed to be able to negotiate with a payer or a major employer. It's been really interesting to see what some of these large scale groups have done going direct to employers with, GI health and, having a direct service line to their practice. So that being said, I think consolidation is going to happen. And, I would encourage groups to have an open mind to it. It is not a threat at all. It is something that is an evolution, and it allows groups to stay independent. These companies that are nimble or practices that are nimble or also embrace change will come out of this pandemic stronger.
Mm-hmm. Scott Fraser, thank you so much for all these insights. It's been fantastic chatting with you.
Praveen, I really enjoyed your labor of love, if you will, in terms of not only the research, but the writing and the time sharing best practices with the broader GI community. It is much needed. I wish everyone continued safety and continued growth and success during this difficult time. We will get through this.